They say no 2 days as a cop are ever the same, but nothing could have prepared me for the night I walked into apartment 407. I thought it would be just another noise complaint, maybe some loud music or a neighborly dispute. I was wrong. Every time I close my eyes, I'm taken back to that dingy corridor, the flickering overhead light, and the single door at the end of the hallway that changed my life forever. Sometimes people assume that police work is all about action car chases, gunfights, and adrenaline. In reality, it's mostly routine paperwork, traffic stops, and yes, the occasional noise complaint. It lulls you into a sense of complacency. But there are moments, horrifying, life-altering moments, that tear you out of that routine and remind you how fragile we all are. This is the story of one such night, and how it still haunts me. My name is Officer Daniel Reyes, and I've been a police officer in Greenwood, Indiana, for going on 9 years. Some people might say 9 years isn't all that long in a career that can span decades, but I've seen enough in that time to last me several lifetimes. Greenwood isn't a big city like Indianapolis or Chicago, but it's not a small town either. It sits in that space between rural farmland and sprawling suburbs, where pockets of old industrial complexes and run-down neighborhoods stand as silent monuments to a time gone by. Growing up just a few miles from Greenwood, I never really imagined I'd become a cop. My dad was a truck driver. My mum worked part-time at the local diner. Money was always tight, but we got by. I went to a local community college after high school, drifting from one major to another without any real direction. Somewhere along the way, I started hanging out with friends who had relatives in law enforcement. They'd share their stories, not the sensationalized stuff, but real community work, checking on seniors, responding to mental health calls, picking up wayward teenagers hanging around in front of the 24-hour grocery store. It struck me that beneath the uniform, cops were human beings trying to do some good in the world. That's how I ended up in the police academy. After graduation, I joined the Greenwood Police Department. It wasn't too long before I learned the ropes, how to talk to people who are on the edge, how to keep your cool when tempers flare, how to balance empathy with authority. Over the years, I built a reputation as the patient one, the guy who could spend an extra hour on the scene if it meant helping a distressed family member or calming a frightened witness. I prided myself on that, thinking I could handle just about anything. The city has its rough patches. Certain neighborhoods known for drug activity or property crime. Industrial parks where break-ins happen more often than not, and long stretches of lonely highway where accidents can turn deadly in an instant. But for the most part, it's a town filled with hard-working folks, families trying to get by, and kids dreaming of bigger things. People often ask, "What's the scariest thing you've encountered?" Usually they want to hear about shootouts, high-speed chases, or busting down doors in the middle of the night. I always have a few stories that satisfy their curiosity, but the truth is the scariest situations are rarely the ones where guns are drawn. They're the ones where you face the unexplained, or you witness something so deeply disturbing that no amount of training can fully prepare you. They're the calls that leave you lying awake at night, replaying every moment in your head, wondering if you did everything you could. In Greenwood, we have our share of domestic disputes, bar fights, and car collisions, but we also have our share of eerie happenings calls that don't quite add up, places rumored to be haunted cases with missing pieces that never quite get resolved. Over the years, I heard bits and pieces from fellow officers. A call where the responding cop heard footsteps in an empty house, or a figure that vanished around a corner, only to reappear in a place it couldn't logically be. I used to brush those off as tall tales or exaggerations. That was before the night I answered the call to apartment 407. It was a Thursday night about a year ago. My shift started at 10 p.m. and was slated to end at 6 a.m. Nights can be quiet or chaotic. There's rarely any middle ground. Sometimes you go the entire shift with nothing but traffic stops and the occasional alarm triggered by a faulty sensor. Other times you're running from one end of the city to the other, chasing down break-ins, loud disturbances, or God knows what else. This particular night started off slowly. I'd already responded to a false alarm at a local strip mall and handled a minor fender bender. At around midnight, dispatch crackled through the radio noise complaint at 1350 Ashland Avenue, apartment 407. Neighbors report loud, disturbing sounds. Loud, disturbing sounds could mean a wild party or a domestic dispute. It could be a TV turned up too high or someone in distress. In most cases, it's nothing, but I've learned never to assume. The caller had mentioned something about banging and screaming, so protocol dictated we take it seriously. I was the closest unit, so I keyed my mic and acknowledged the call. As I drove toward Ashland Avenue, I passed through neighborhoods where old Victorian houses stood next to newer, cheaply constructed apartment complexes. The closer I got to 1350 Ashland, the more the surroundings changed. The buildings looked older, with paint peeling off wooden siding, and windows that seemed to stare blankly at the street below. Rows of cars lined the curbs, many of them with dents and rust spots. Streetlights flickered above graffiti-strewn walls. The place had a reputation for petty crime, drug activity, and the occasional violent incident. Still, a noise complaint wasn't usually cause for alarm. When I arrived, I parked in the complex's cracked asphalt lot. Only a handful of lights glowed in the windows, some flickering with the blue hue of a TV set. Apartment 407 was on the 4th floor of a building that had seen far better days. I used my flashlight to navigate a stairwell littered with cigarette butts and discarded fast food cups. The air smelled faintly of stale beer and damp concrete. On the 2nd floor, a flickering fluorescent light made the hallway look like something out of a horror movie. Each step echoed in the narrow space, accompanied by the faint hum of refrigerators and the muffled sound of televisions behind closed doors. By the time I reached the 4th floor, I noticed the hallway was oddly silent. Often you'd hear a dog barking, a baby crying, or the low rumble of music. But here there was nothing but the buzz of that damn overhead light. Apartment 407's door was at the very end of the corridor. A gold-colored number 407 hung crookedly, and the paint around it was chipped. I paused for a moment to gather my bearings, reminding myself this was just a noise complaint. No reason to feel uneasy, right? Still something about that corridor, about that door, made my skin prickle. I knocked firmly. "Greenwood Police, anyone home?" Silence. I knocked again. "Greenwood Police. We received a call about a disturbance." More silence. I pressed my ear against the door, listening. Maybe the occupant had fallen asleep or left. But I thought I heard something faint, a soft shuffling sound, like bare feet scraping across a floor. Then it was gone. I looked around. The hallway was empty except for a few worn welcome mats in front of other apartments. No curious neighbors peeking out. No prying eyes from behind chain locks. Another wave of unease washed over me. Something about the situation felt off, but I couldn't pinpoint what. Following procedure, I tried the doorknob. Locked. I knocked once more, louder this time. Still no response. Just as I reached for my radio to request backup, I heard a click from inside like a lock sliding open. The door drifted inward, an inch, not enough to see anything, but enough to sense a sudden rush of stale, cold air. I announced myself again, pushing the door open a bit further. My flashlight illuminated a cramped living room with outdated furniture. The air smelled faintly of mildew and something else I couldn't identify. It wasn't decay exactly, nor the odor of a trash-filled apartment, but something metallic. Something that made the hairs on my arms stand up. I took one careful step inside, calling out police officer. "Is everyone okay in here?" My voice echoed strangely as if the apartment swallowed sound. The living room was dimly lit by a single lamp with a flickering bulb. My eyes took a moment to adjust. I panned my flashlight around threadbare couch, a coffee table covered in old newspapers, and an ancient TV on a small stand. No signs of a party, no obvious signs of struggle. Yet there was a palpable tension in the air, an almost oppressive heaviness that I couldn't explain. Then I saw it, a smear of something dark on the floor, near the base of the couch. Leaning down, I trained my flashlight on it. It was reddish-brown in color, half-dried. My pulse quickened. Blood. It looked like it, but could have been something else. I followed the smear. It led toward a hallway, branching off to the right, presumably to the bedrooms and bathroom. The further I walked, the more I noticed small droplets on the floor. There was a pattern almost like footprints, but irregularly spaced. I kept calling out, "Greenwood Police, is anyone hurt? I'm here to help." No answer. The only sound was the faint hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen behind me. Most noise complaints turn out to be nothing. Yet here I was, following a trail that suggested something terrible might have happened. Every step felt heavier, like some unseen force was urging me to turn around and leave. I couldn't. Someone could be injured, or worse. As I moved down the hallway, I noticed the walls were dotted with holes where pictures might have hung in the past. The paint was cracked, and the faint smell of mildew grew stronger. My flashlight flickered for a moment, not uncommon, but enough to ratchet up my anxiety. I tapped it against my palm. The beam steadied. At the end of the hallway were two doors on opposite sides. The one on the left was closed, the one on the right slightly ajar. The trail of droplets led to the right. I braced myself, scanning the door for any sign of forced entry. Nothing, just a crack wide enough for me to see part of what looked like a bedroom dresser. I gently nudged the door open with the toe of my boot. The hinges creaked loudly in the silence, sending a shiver down my spine. Inside, the faint glow of a street lamp outside provided just enough light to see the outline of a bed, its sheets rumpled and half on the floor. Clothes were scattered around, some of them torn. An overturned lamp lay near the nightstand, the bulb shattered. The metallic smell was stronger here, mixed with something like sweat and fear. I called out again, voice shaking slightly. "Police. Is anyone here?" That's when I heard a soft whimper coming from somewhere in the darkness. I swung my flashlight toward the sound. Near the foot of the bed, I spotted a pair of bare feet, pale and motionless. My chest tightened as I moved closer. It was a woman lying on her side hair, matted to her forehead. My immediate thought was that she might be unconscious, or worse. Bending down, I checked her pulse. It was there, faint and rapid. Her face was bruised with dried blood on her lower lip. Her eyes fluttered open for just a moment as I gently tried to rouse her. She let out a weak moan, but couldn't form words. I reached for my radio. "Dispatch, this is Officer Reyes. I've got a potentially injured female at 1350 Ashland Avenue, apartment 407. Request immediate EMS backup." As I spoke, I heard movement behind me. My training kicked in. I stood, hand hovering near my holster, scanning the room. The closet door was partially open, revealing shadows inside. My flashlight caught a glimpse of something moving, a shape that darted deeper into the darkness. Stepping carefully around the injured woman, I approached the closet. My heart pounded like a drum in my ears. The closet was cluttered full of clothes on wire hangers, boxes stacked haphazardly. I could hear soft, ragged breathing, the sound of someone trying desperately not to be heard. I shone my flashlight in. That's when I saw him. A boy, maybe 10 years old, crouched between boxes. His eyes were wide with terror, and tear tracks glistened on his cheeks. "Hey, buddy," I said as gently as I could, my voice trembling despite my attempts to stay calm. "It's okay, I'm a police officer. I'm here to help." He didn't move, just stared at me like a cornered animal. I noticed something wet on his shirt. It looked like more blood. His or someone else's, I couldn't tell. The boy gave a shaky nod, but remained curled up. I could see his hands trembling as he clutched a small stuffed rabbit, its fur matted with the same reddish-brown stains. I glanced back at this woman on the floor. She was drifting in and out of consciousness, blood staining the carpet beneath her. Where was the person responsible for all this? "Is there anyone else here?" I asked softly. The boy didn't answer. Instead, he just squeezed his eyes shut, rocking slightly back and forth. A surge of protective instinct welled up inside me. I wanted to reach in, pick him up, and carry him out of this nightmare. But I also had to secure the scene. Who knew if the attacker was still in the apartment? I grabbed my radio again, whispering, "Dispatch Reyes. I have a child here. Could be injured, uncertain. Where's my backup?" The dispatcher's voice crackled back, telling me another unit was on the way, along with an ambulance. With every passing second, I became more aware of how vulnerable I was in that cramped bedroom. There could be someone armed in the next room, or behind me, waiting for me, to drop my guard. Carefully, I helped the boy out of the closet. He resisted at first, flinching, when my hand touched his arm. The moment I guided him past the bed, he turned his gaze to the woman lying there. "Mum," he whimpered, tears spilling onto his cheeks. I swallowed hard. This was his mother. She looked badly injured, possibly the victim of a violent assault. Her labored breathing told me we didn't have much time. I coaxed the boy toward the hallway. "Stay here, okay? I'm going to check the rest of the apartment. I promise we'll get her help." He clung to my sleeve, panic in his eyes. "He's still here," he whispered, voice shaking. My blood ran cold. "Who's still here?" The boy didn't answer, but he jerked his head toward the closed door across the hall. I placed the boy against the wall and knelt so we were at eye level. "Listen, everything's going to be okay. I need you to wait here for the other officers. I'll be right back." He let out a terrified sob, but nodded. His tiny hands clutched the stuffed rabbit like a lifeline. Standing up, I drew my sidearm heart pounding with an intensity I'd seldom felt. This was no longer just a noise complaint or simple assault. There was a lurking presence in apartment 407, someone who might be capable of more violence. I moved to the closed door on the other side of the hallway, adrenaline surging through my veins. The door was locked, or at least stuck. I tried the knob, and it wouldn't budge. Leaning in, I pressed my ear against the wood. I heard nothing at first, just my own ragged breathing. Then faintly a scraping sound, like something heavy dragging across the floor. I announced myself, "Police officer." "Open the door." No response. I tried again, louder. Still nothing. I glanced over my shoulder to check on the boy who now stood near his mother, tears still streaming. Then I decided I had no choice. I took a few steps back, steeled myself, and delivered a solid kick near the lock. The wood splintered on the second kick, the door flying open to reveal utter darkness. I raised my flashlight, scanning the room, gun at the ready. It appeared to be a small office or a guest bedroom. A desk stood against one wall, papers scattered everywhere. The overhead light fixture dangled by a wire, the bulb missing. My flashlight beam caught a glimpse of something moving in the corner. A figure hunched low, breathing heavily. I ordered, "Show me your hands." The figure snapped its head up. In the next split second, it lunged toward me, brandishing what looked like a hunting knife. I barely had time to register its face, wild eyes, gaunt features, hair disheveled as though he'd been awake for days. He let out a guttural cry, swinging the blade in my direction. Instinct took over. I sidestepped, knocking his arm aside with my forearm, and brought my gun up, shouting, "Drop the knife!" My voice rang out, but he didn't comply. Instead, he swung again, aiming for my midsection. In that heartbeat, I thought of the boy and his injured mother. If this man got past me, they'd be defenseless. I squeezed the trigger once, aiming low, hoping to disable rather than kill. The gunshot echoed in the confined space. The attacker stumbled backward, letting out a pained cry. He dropped to one knee, blood staining his shirt around a wound in his shoulder or upper chest. Still, he wouldn't let go of the knife. He tried to lunge again, but his body betrayed him. He collapsed onto the floor, gasping for air. I kicked the knife away, then radioed for immediate medical assistance. My hands trembled as I kept my gun trained on him, adrenaline coursing through every nerve. Outside, I could hear the sirens of approaching backup units and ambulance. The attacker's eyes rolled back, and he slipped into unconsciousness. Moments later, 2 more officers arrived, guns drawn, having heard the shot on the radio. They took control of the scene, securing the wounded suspect in handcuffs. An ambulance crew rushed in to attend to both the suspect and the woman in the bedroom. The boy clung to me, his fingers digging into my uniform as a paramedic gently coaxed him away. I could see the paramedic's sympathetic expression. We all knew this child's life had just been shattered. While the EMTs worked, I stood back, heart still hammering, replaying everything in my head. A sense of unreality washed over me. I'd fired my weapon, a choice we never take lightly. The reality of the suspect's blood on the floor felt like a punch to the gut. But he'd given me no choice. If I hadn't acted, I might be the one bleeding on the floor. Or worse, the mother and child could have suffered more. The mother was in bad shape, broken ribs, a concussion, multiple bruises and lacerations. The paramedics found a deep gash on her leg that was still oozing blood. She was slipping in and out of consciousness, but she managed to weakly grasp the paramedic's hand and mumble something about her son. They calmed her, assuring her he was safe. As the scene got busier, I noticed how the paramedics looked uneasy, as if the apartment itself was suffocating them. Often after responding to a shooting or severe domestic violence call, the tension is thick. But this was different. There was an almost tangible darkness in that apartment, a sense that something malignant had unfolded within those walls long before I arrived. One of the other officers, an older guy named Connor, patted my shoulder. "Reyes, you all right? You look pale." I nodded, forcing myself to take a deep breath. "I'll be fine," I said, though my voice trembled. While the medics stabilized the wounded suspect, I took a moment to speak with the boy now wrapped in a blanket. He stared at me with eyes that seemed older than his years, as though he'd borne witness to unimaginable horrors. "I am sorry," he whispered, tears still spilling. He went crazy. He hurt Mom. I crouched next to him, fighting back my own tears. You have nothing to be sorry about. I'm just glad you're safe. My gaze flicked down to the stuffed rabbit in his arms, stained with blood. I gently asked, "What's your name?" "Son." He swallowed hard, blinking. "Tyler," he said in a barely audible voice. "Tyler Martin." "Okay, Tyler. You're going to be okay. Your mom's in good hands, and we're going to take care of you." I could see a flicker of relief cross his features, but it was fleeting, overshadowed by the trauma he'd endured. One of the female officers took Tyler aside to escort him to the ambulance, where he could be checked out. Meanwhile, Connor and I cleared the rest of the apartment. The living room and kitchen were cluttered, but didn't show any signs of a larger struggle. It seemed like everything went down in that bedroom. Blood spatter told part of the story, a struggle perhaps the woman trying to defend herself. We found shards of a broken mirror near the bed, along with a torn photograph that featured Tyler, his mother, and the man who attacked me. A family once, though it was clear that home life hadn't been peaceful. Forensics arrived to photograph the scene. I gave a preliminary statement to my supervisor, explaining that the suspect had lunged with a knife, forcing me to discharge my weapon. Standard protocol required me to surrender my duty pistol for ballistic testing, and a thorough investigation would follow. The knowledge that I had followed procedure offered some reassurance, but I couldn't shake the feeling of dread that lingered. There was something else in that apartment, something intangible, that still made my skin crawl. A detective arrived shortly thereafter and pulled me aside for a quick debrief. "You okay?" she asked, concern edging her voice. She was an old friend, Detective Mari Phillips, who'd worked with me on several cases. I shrugged. "I'll manage." She looked past me, her gaze settling on the hallway. "We'll comb this place for evidence, but I can already see the father's prints everywhere. The mother has multiple defensive wounds, so it's clearly a domestic situation that escalated to attempted murder. Kid's traumatized, but physically he seems okay." "Yeah," I said, nodding. "He was hiding in the closet. He tried to warn me about his father." Marie placed a hand on my shoulder. "You saved their lives tonight. Don't forget that." She paused, glancing down at my shaking hands. "You need a minute." I inhaled slowly, steadying myself. "I'll be fine eventually. That's what we always say. But sometimes we're never the same." Later that night, after the suspect and victims were transported, and the scene began to clear, I found myself alone in the apartment. It's not common to linger, but I needed a moment to make sense of it all, to piece together every detail for my report. The overhead lights were on now, casting harsh illumination on the stained carpet and splintered door. I walked through the rooms one more time, noticing things I hadn't seen before. Child's drawings pinned to the refrigerator, a half-empty pack of cigarettes on the counter, a calendar with appointments scribbled in the margins. Ordinary details of a not-so-ordinary home life. When I returned to the bedroom, something drew my attention. A small book lay half-hidden under the bed, its leather cover worn with age. Curious, I picked it up, flipping through the pages. It looked like a journal, though the handwriting was messy, disjointed sometimes, scrawled in all caps. Words like demon's possession and purified jumped out at me. It was rife with paranoid ramblings, references to Tyler as the child, and how he must be cleansed. My stomach churned. This man had been spiraling for some time. The repeated references to hearing voices, seeing shadows, convinced me that he might have been in the grip of a severe psychotic episode or something worse. One paragraph stood out. "I hear them at night, whispering in the walls. They tell me Tyler is the key to darkness, that I must rid him of the evil. As I read those words, I felt a chill. It explained the bizarre symbols scrawled on the bedroom walls and the terror in Tyler's eyes. This wasn't just a sudden burst of violence. It was a manifestation of deep-seated delusions. Clutching the journal, I stood there, feeling a cold weight in my chest. There was so much cruelty and madness in those pages, so much potential for real horror if I hadn't responded in time. That's the moment I realized how close this had come to being a true tragedy, or something even more horrific with no survivors. In the following days, the department placed me on administrative leave, standard procedure, after an officer-involved shooting. I spent my time at home replaying the events in my mind. I gave multiple statements to Internal Affairs, to detectives, to the district attorney. All the evidence supported my account. The father, whose name was David Martin, had attacked me with a knife. The mother, Lisa Martin, had been hospitalized with severe injuries. Tyler ended up staying with an aunt in a neighboring county. Their home life had apparently devolved over the past year, with David exhibiting extreme paranoia and violent tendencies. For a while, I tried to push it to the back of my mind. Therapy sessions were mandatory, and I found myself discussing not just the shooting, but the unsettling nature of the apartment, the sense of dread I'd felt. My therapist was understanding, but reminded me that my perception of the place might have been colored by the trauma of the event. Maybe so, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something evil had festered in that home, amplifying David's already fracturing psyche. A few weeks after the incident, I learned Lisa Martin had been released from the hospital. She was recovering, though emotionally she was in a fragile state. Tyler was seeing a child psychologist, and from what I heard through the department's victim assistance program, he was making slow progress. I tried not to imagine the nightmares he must have, reliving the sight of his father attacking him or his mother. As for David Martin, he remained in custody, hospitalized under psychiatric watch. There was talk of him being found incompetent to stand trial, that he might spend years in a state hospital. The evidence of his delusions was overwhelming, from the journal I'd found to the testimony of neighbors who'd heard him ranting about demons in the walls. In the official reports, it was labeled a case of severe mental illness combined with substance abuse. But at night, when I closed my eyes, I remembered the apartment's stillness, the cold air that rushed out when I opened the door, and the oppressive sense of something watching me. I'd wake up drenched in sweat, heart pounding, expecting to see those wound eyes staring at me from the darkness. It took months of therapy, talking with friends and leaning on my fellow officers to begin feeling normal again. Even now, I sometimes dream about that hallway, about the boy's terrified face, about the moment I pulled the trigger. People often assume that once the paperwork is done and the court proceedings have ended, cops move on to the next case. But some calls stick with you. They become an echo in the back of your mind, a reminder that evil can lurk in the most mundane places, that behind a simple door, number 407, entire worlds of horror can unfold. This wasn't just about physical scars. It was the emotional and psychological aftermath that followed me around like a shadow. My relationship with my family changed. I found myself overly cautious, double-checking the locks at night, hesitating to answer the door if I wasn't expecting someone. My wife noticed I had trouble sleeping, that I startled easily at loud noises. She tried to be supportive, but I could see the worry in her eyes. I also became more protective of my own kids, reading too much into their every scraped knee or frightened look. In the department, I became a kind of cautionary tale, the officer who responded to a routine noise complaint, and nearly lost his life. The younger recruits would ask me how I kept my cool. I'd tell them, you never really do. You just do your job. Hope your training kicks in, and pray you make it home. The day I returned to active duty, my co-workers welcomed me back with handshakes and pats on the shoulder. But beneath their supportive gestures, I could sense their own fears that any one of us could find ourselves in that same position at any moment. I also found a renewed sense of purpose. If there was something that kept me going, it was the idea that my actions had saved Tyler and his mother. That no matter how terrified I'd been, I did what needed to be done. It didn't erase the nightmares, but it gave them a context. Sometimes you face darkness to protect the innocent. That's the job. Maybe that's the entire point of wearing the badge in the first place. Some cases leave scars you can't see. Even now, I still wonder what really happened that night in apartment 407, and what might have transpired if I'd arrived 10 minutes later, or not at all. Would you have done the same in my shoes? Sometimes the line between good and evil blurs when confronted with the inexplicable corners of human madness. In the end, I'm left with haunting memories, and the knowledge that one routine call changed at least 3 lives forever. Tyler and Lisa are out there trying to move on, piecing together what remains of their family. And David Martin sits in a hospital or a prison cell, still wrestling with whatever demons drove him to unspeakable acts. If this story made you think twice about what cops face in the dark, hit like, share, and subscribe for more true police stories. Because out there, beyond the flashing lights and the yellow tape, there are truths more unsettling than any horror movie. I faced them one cold night on Ashland Avenue, and I'll carry that night with me until my last day on the force, and probably long after.